Hey scholars, welcome to section 9-4, our last one of chapter 9, and we're looking at how can we protect wild species from premature extinction. So what are our goals? Based according to the precautionary principle we talked about before, we should take measures to prevent or reduce harm in the environment, human health, as well as species. So we're going to take a look at this today, and what can we do on our end? One of the things that we have done so far is international treaties to help protect species on a global scale. In 1975, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, or CITES as you want to call it, was a treaty signed by 172 countries that basically banned hunting, capturing, selling threatened species or endangered animals, which has helped quite a bit so far. The Convention on Biological Diversity, CBD, was one that was also signed and ratified by 190 countries. Not the U.S. though, but it focused on the ecosystem approach. And one of the reasons why we think this was not signed was because of our need to drill for oil in the United States. One of the other case studies is on the Endangered Species Act, what we've done so far. Endangered Species Act, or the ESA, was established in 1973. It was later amended in 82, 83, and also 85. But basically, it was used to identify and protect endangered species from becoming extinct in the U.S. as well as abroad in the world. Another thing that we found was on hotspots, there are literally areas where we were finding a majority, when we were identifying, a majority of our endangered species were found in very select few locations in the world. And so one of the things that conservation biologists are focusing on is we need to make those ecosystems our top priority, since they're holding a lot of those endangered animals. Another one, which stands for HCP, or the Habitat Conservation Plan, is basically where it's kind of a loophole, really. It was a kind of a way to get people on board in supporting endangered species or threatened species, and they basically allowed landowners to develop. The developer is allowed to destroy some critical habitat in exchange for taking major steps to protect members of the species on the endangered species that inhabit that area. And then you're thinking, well, why are they letting them destroy the habitat in the first place? And I kind of agree with you. I think it's more of a loophole, and it has allowed more landowners to develop, or developers to develop and take away habitat rather than help, but at least it does give them the mindset that we can take a little bit, but we need to help more. I guess they were trying to get people on board, but I don't know how effective that really was. The ESA, or Endangered Species Act, has come under mixed reviews. A lot of people say weaken it, which is kind of, people have come up and said weaken it, make protection of endangered species only on private land voluntary, have the government compensate landowners if they are forced to stop using part of the land because of the endangered species, make it harder and more expensive to list newly endangered species, requiring government wildlife officials to navigate through a series of hearings and peer reviews, eliminate the need to design critical habitat. So just a number of things to weaken it. They've all said repeal it, totally take it off, modify it. So maybe some people have said strengthen it, simplify it, streamline it. But it has had a lot of scrutiny. But for the most part, this is just some of the animals that they've collected, and this is through the Endangered Species Act have collected and really stuck it to people on. But as far as fines goes, science focused though, there have been many accomplishments of the Endangered Species Act. Really, species are listed only when in serious danger of extinction. It takes decades for most species to become endangered or extinct. So more than half the species listed on the Endangered Species Act are stable or improving, which is really awesome because their budget has been really small. And this is just interesting. It said the budget for 2005, $58 million, and that says at what the Department of Defense spends in a little more than an hour. So I mean, you imagine how little the budget's been, and it's had such a huge impact. Managing to stabilize improved conditions more than half of the species is an insane amount of improvement based on such a small budget. Imagine what they would have if they had a larger budget. Suggested change to ESA or increase the budget, obviously. Maybe we get better impacts. Develop recovery plans more quickly. Establish a core of the endangered organism survival habitat where we're basically sectioning off a habitat for no use for anybody, so those species can rebound and repopulate. When we've kind of done that, this kind of leads us to protect areas. But 1903, my favorite president of all time, and if you come in and tell me who it is, I'll give you a bonus stamp, which is Theodore Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt established our first national parks, or wildlife refuges, and most of them were wetland sanctuaries. They still are. More needed for endangered plants. Unfortunately, he focused on animals and ducks because he was an avid hunter. But also could abandoned military lands be used for wildlife habitats? So that's always a good question I think it should be, and I think more military land should be designated for wildlife habitats. I'm biased because I live in the back gate near Hubert, and they just literally ripped down a bunch of forest right along Bear Creek Road, which I'm really not happy about. But it seems like the more military we have, the more conflict we have as far as U.S. goes and over oil. I don't know how much abandoned military lands we're going to have. It just seems like military lands will keep expanding and using habitat. Another way to hold on and protect species is through gene or seed banks. One of my bulletin boards has a snowflake on there. They literally saved his male reproductive organs in case they ever wanted his genes, and unless they ever wanted to reproduce another gorilla that has albinism. That's just an example. There's seed banks, preserving genetic material of endangered plants in case we ever wanted to grow them or use them at a later date. Botanical gardens and arboretas are ways of really having, they're like living plant zoos basically, but they're zoos for plants. And a really beautiful one is in the campus of UNC Chapel Hill. Also farms to raise organisms for commercial sale instead of trying to harvest them from the environment. Other techniques that are zoos and aquariums. And many people have gone to those, and they can protect some species, especially ones that are kind of past their ecological extinction stage, and maybe even on the endangered species list. But there are techniques for preserving in zoos, doing some egg pulling, taking eggs from nests, making sure they hatch correctly and giving them the best care, captive breeding, artificial insemination, making sure the fertilization occurs, embryo transfer from one organism to the next, use of incubators, which allows for better breeding and better chance of survival of those young, and even cross-fostering, taking, like they do this with apes all the time, where if a mother dies, literally they might have a foster mother that can step in and raise that baby gorilla. A lot of times they have limited space and funds for zoos, and there's lots of critics out there about zoos that say facilities are like prisons for organisms. Some places I agree, some places I don't. Just depends on the zoo, but really zoos have come a long way. If you look at the Bronx Zoo and look at pictures of the Bronx Zoo, it was literally just like bars and cages. It did look like a prison. Now they almost look like menageries and sanctuaries for organisms to kind of hang out and enjoy life instead of being behind bars. So let's get down to what can you do as an individual. Obviously, don't buy furs, ivory products, endangered items made from endangered species or threatened species. Do not buy wood or paper products from old-growth forests because they could, in the tropics, they're deforestation. We've seen the impacts of those. Don't buy birds, snakes, turtles, tropical fish, and other animals that are taken from the wild. So take ones that have been, locally bred. Do not buy orchids, cacti, other plants that are taken from the wild. Again, try to breed inside, in captivity, and then spread the word. Talk to your friends, relatives about the problem, and see what they can do about it as well. Last case study for this chapter is the California condor. One of the success stories of the Endangered Species Act. Is the largest North American bird. I looked for them when I was in the Grand Canyon, couldn't find them, but nearly extinct. Birds were captured and bred in captivity. There was only maybe 50 left. And they took a bunch of them, they bred them in the captivity, and then released them. By 2007, 135 different birds were released in the wild, and they were mostly threatened by lead poisoning. That was in getting into their food supply. And one of the biggest things about biodiversity and maintaining it is that precautionary principle. There are primary components of biodiversity. We need to preserve species and preserve ecosystems. If you do those two things and you stay away from all those HIPCO things that we talked about of human impacts on the environment, on a species, we'll be just fine in maintaining terrestrial as well as aquatic biodiversity. That is Chapter 9. We'll see you guys next week.